Brisbane is changing, and perhaps faster than at any point in recent history. This week we've seen fresh plans for taller apartment buildings, reduced parking requirements, and new suburban renewal precincts designed to squeeze thousands more homes into established suburbs. But at the same time, controversy has erupted over the state government asking developers to remove affordable housing from projects that were already willing to include it. And while all of that is happening, some of the city's biggest tourism announcements in years are raising another question altogether. What kind of city are we trying to become? So today we're unpacking all of it, from housing and planning to major events, community projects, and some lighter stories to finish things off. I'm Adam, this is the Brisbane Channel, and let's get updated. We'll start with housing because there has been a huge amount happening this week. Brisbane City Council has launched a new housing tracker website revealing that just over 72,000 additional homes have been created across Brisbane since the end of 2016. The council says almost 49,000 homes have been approved since 2021 alone, with most of those approvals being apartments and townhouses. But the really interesting figure is this one. Under current projections, Brisbane needs around 210,800 new homes by 2046. Yet council data suggests that even if every currently approved home gets built, Brisbane would still fall significantly short of that target. In other words, even with all of the cranes many residents feel are already dominating the skyline, the city may still not be building enough. And that's the context behind a number of planning changes council has now progressed. The most significant relates to low to medium density residential areas, which cover around 14% of Brisbane's residential land. Under the proposal, there would be greater opportunities for townhouses, row houses, and apartments in areas close to transport, shopping centres, and other services. Council estimates these changes could unlock up to 6,000 additional homes by the 2032 Olympics. The package now heads to the state government for approval. Council has also voted to reduce parking requirements for new apartment developments. The argument is that providing underground parking is expensive. Council cited Grattan Institute research suggesting minimum parking requirements can add around $62,000 to the cost of a one-bedroom apartment, rising to around $140,000 for larger dwellings. Critics, however, argue there's no guarantee those savings will actually be passed on to buyers or renters, with Labor opposition leader Jared Cassidy warning the reduced costs could simply boost developer margins. Whether those savings ultimately reach buyers and renters will likely depend on how competitive the market becomes over time. And this is where I differ from some of the more vocal opposition to these changes. The simple fact is that Brisbane is growing. Whether people like it or not, hundreds of thousands of additional residents are expected to call this city home over the coming decades. That growth has to go somewhere. The alternative to greater density isn't no growth, it's more sprawl, longer commutes, increased pressure on infrastructure, and the gradual erosion of the green spaces that many people value. The challenge isn't whether Brisbane changes, it's whether we manage that change thoughtfully. Are developments located where infrastructure exists or can reasonably be provided? Are communities genuinely consulted? And are we creating neighbourhoods people actually want to live in? One proposal already testing Brisbane's appetite for change is a proposed 25-storey apartment tower planned opposite Westfield Carindale. If approved, it would become the suburb's first building of that height. Interestingly, the site sits just outside the area currently earmarked for increased height limits. The developer argues the proposal aligns with council's broader tall over sprawl strategy. Projects like this are often seen as a practical response to housing shortages near jobs and services. At the same time, questions inevitably arise around precedent and whether local infrastructure can keep pace. It's exactly the sort of debate we're likely to see much more of over the coming years. Perhaps the most contentious housing story this week, however, involved affordable housing. It emerged that Deputy Premier and Planning Minister Bluey had written to developers requesting that affordable housing components be removed from 2 projects. One of those developments, the Lamington Markets proposal in Lutwyche, originally included 36 affordable dwellings. The wording used in the notice stated, "The applicant is requested to make the following change to the application. Remove the affordable housing component and reallocate these dwellings as standard market rate housing within the development." Now, it's important to note the wording says requested, not required. However, many observers have questioned whether developers would realistically feel comfortable ignoring such a request from the planning minister overseeing the approval pathway. The government's broader argument has consistently been that mandatory affordable housing requirements discourage development and reduce overall housing supply as a result. The logic is that fewer restrictions lead to more homes being built. But critics argue this particular case complicates that narrative. These affordable dwellings weren't being forced upon an unwilling developer. The developer had already included them in its proposal. And that's why the decision has prompted so much confusion and criticism. If the project was proceeding anyway, why remove homes that would have been sold below market rates? The government maintains that increasing supply generally is the key to improving affordability, but for many Queenslanders struggling to enter the housing market, that explanation hasn't necessarily answered the underlying question. And while debates continue over exactly what kinds of homes should be built, another proposal raises an entirely different question. What sort of city are we actually building? Former Olympians Mark and Tracy Stockwell have unveiled ambitious plans to transform the former Parmalat site, the old milk factory, at South Brisbane into a major mixed-use precinct. The vision includes apartment towers, hundreds of food and entertainment venues, public spaces, and even potential Olympic uses, including medal ceremonies and temporary sporting venues. Brisbane 2032 organisers have confirmed they'll consider opportunities to incorporate aspects of the proposal into games planning. The proposal certainly paints an ambitious picture of Brisbane's future, but for some residents, the conversation isn't really about whether growth should happen at all, it's about whether the infrastructure needed to support that growth is arriving quickly enough. South Brisbane and West End are already among the city's fastest growing areas, with concerns raised about pressure on schools, transport, and community facilities. Again, it comes back to that broader challenge. Growth isn't necessarily the issue. The question is whether infrastructure, services, and planning keep pace with that growth. And that's really the story of Brisbane right now. A city trying to solve a housing shortage while preserving the lifestyle people moved here for in the first place. It's not an easy balancing act, but one that seems increasingly clear. A quick shout out to channel sponsor YB Painting. They recently picked up 2 first and 3 second place awards at the Master Painters Australia Queensland Awards for 2025, which gives you an idea of the standard they're working at. They offer fixed pricing and a 5-year warranty on their work, so you know exactly what you're getting up front. You can claim an exclusive 10% discount by scanning the QR code on screen or through the link in the description. While Greater Brisbane grapples with the challenge of growth, there's also a concerted effort underway to shape how the region presents itself to the world. Several major announcements were made under the state government's Destination 2045 tourism strategy this week, painting a picture of the kinds of experiences Queensland hopes will attract visitors in the years leading up to 2032 and beyond. Bluey's World has officially been extended until February 2028, ensuring the attraction remains exclusive to Brisbane for at least another 2 years. Since opening in late 2024, the experience has welcomed more than 500,000 visitors. According to figures released this week, it has generated over 500,000 visitor nights and contributed almost $157 million in economic activity across Queensland. Whatever you think of government support for tourism attractions, it's hard to argue Bluey hasn't become one of Brisbane's biggest tourism success stories. A locally created show animated right here in Brisbane, it's evolved into one of the city's most recognisable tourism drawcards. But Bluey isn't the only experience Brisbane is hoping visitors will travel for. The Gabba is set to host its first major concert since Taylor Swift's Reputation tour back in 2018. And it's certainly not easing back into things. Legendary Spanish tenor Jose Carreras will lead a one-night-only Australian-exclusive event called Carreras and Friends on December the 5th. Now, if opera isn't normally your thing, stick with me here, because this one isn't simply an opera concert. Inspired by the famous Pavarotti and Friends performances, the event will bring together an extraordinary lineup spanning opera, rock, and pop. Robbie Williams, The Cause, Ronan Keating, Natalie Imbruglia, Darren Hayes, Anne Wilson, Catherine Jenkins, Brisbane's own Shepherd, and Mark Vincent. Throughout the evening, artists will perform their own hits alongside special collaborations with Carreras himself. Organisers say Robbie Williams is expected to join Carreras for performances of Angels and My Way, while other artists will move between solo performances and unique duet combinations. Backed by the Queensland Symphony Orchestra and Choir, Carreras and Friends promises to transform the Gabba into a massive open-air concert experience. And the scale of the production is substantial. More than 90 musicians and choir members are expected to perform, supported by a production crew of over 300 people and more than 400 stage lights. For Jose Carreras himself, the date is significant. He'll be celebrating his 80th birthday. And speaking to Brisbane media this week, Carreras said Brisbane's Olympic future was one of the reasons he wanted to be involved. Drawing parallels with his home city of Barcelona, host of the 1992 Games, he said the Olympics aren't just about sport. They're also about culture, community, and creating moments that bring an entire city together. And perhaps that's what makes the announcement particularly interesting, because when you step back and look at the bigger picture, Brisbane is increasingly building a calendar filled with experiences that people are travelling specifically to attend. And perhaps the clearest sign of how Brisbane is evolving as an event city is this. Carreras and Friends won't even be the only major concert happening in Brisbane that night. Over at Suncorp Stadium, Guns N' Roses are also scheduled to perform on December the 5th. Not that long ago, Brisbane residents often felt they were overlooked when major international tours came to Australia. Now we're reaching a point where two stadium-sized events featuring globally recognised artists can happen on the same evening. Whether these experiences become part of Brisbane's long-term identity remains to be seen. But they do suggest the city is becoming increasingly confident in its ability to attract experiences that not all that long ago might have been expected to land elsewhere. And if you're interested in seeing Carreras and Friends for yourself, pre-sale access is already underway, with general public ticket sales beginning on Monday. But while this concert won't take place until December, we did get some fresh evidence this week of what these kinds of major events can mean for Brisbane's economy. New figures were also released this week showing the Royal Edinburgh military tattoo exceeded expectations earlier this year. More than 120,000 people attended the 4 performances at Suncorp Stadium, generating over $47 million in economic impact and around 184,000 visitor nights across Queensland. It's these kinds of figures governments point to when justifying public investment in major events. Whether it's Bluey's World, Carreras and Friends, or any of the other major events Brisbane is increasingly attracting, there's another piece of the puzzle that's just as important: making it easier for people to actually visit. And that's where the next announcement comes in. New Jetstar services linking Brisbane and the Gold Coast to Western Sydney Airport were confirmed this week, with the state government estimating the routes could generate 262,000 inbound seats over 2 years and inject almost $200 million into Queensland's economy. There was also funding announced for several tourism projects across Queensland through the Tourism Icons Investment Fund. Among these was the project that includes the proposed Brisbane River Flying Fox, which was allocated $4 million. And that Brisbane River Flying Fox proposal may be particularly interesting because the person behind it will actually be joining me for an upcoming podcast here on the Brisbane Channel. So if you've got questions about that project, let me know in the comments and I'll see if I can put them to him when we have a chat. While the bigger tourism announcements we've just covered are about attracting visitors to Queensland, there were also a few stories this week about strengthening the communities people already call home. Construction has officially begun on the long-awaited Carindale Women's Shed. The project emerged from a community consultation session held in 2023, where around 200 local women came together to discuss what facilities they felt were missing from the area. Now, after several years of planning, the idea is becoming reality. The Women's Shed will be located within the Clem Jones Centre precinct and is being jointly funded by Brisbane City Council and the Carindale Leagues Club. Once complete, it will provide a dedicated space for women to learn practical skills, share knowledge, build friendships, and participate in community activities. And I think there's something significant about this one. Community consultation often attracts criticism, with many residents feeling decisions have already been made before public feedback is sought, and that consultation is just a tokenistic box-ticking exercise. But this appears to be an example of the process working as intended. The need was identified by the community itself, and several years later, that idea has evolved into a tangible project that will hopefully serve local women for generations to come. And while the Women's Shed is focused on creating connections within the community, another announcement this week centered on one of the region's biggest ongoing challenges, making sure people have somewhere to live in the first place. And while much of the housing conversation this week focused on future planning changes, there was also some progress on a much smaller but very real project in Moreton Bay. Murphy Builders has now been appointed to deliver a new 14-unit community housing development on Oakey Flat Road. The development will include a mix of 1, 2 and 3 bedroom units catering to a range of residents including seniors, families and people living with disability. Importantly, these homes will be allocated to eligible people currently on the Queensland Housing Register, providing long-term accommodation for those in need of safe and stable housing. The project is also taking a slightly different approach to delivery. Moreton Bay Council has provided a low-cost lease over council-owned land to community housing provider Coast to Bay, allowing the organisation to develop and manage the site. Beyond the housing itself, the complex will include a community room designed to host tenant activities, group meetings, small events and programs delivered by local service providers, with the aim of building connection and reducing isolation among residents. Construction is expected to be completed by late 2027. Now, 14 homes aren't going to solve Southeast Queensland's housing shortage, but stories like this are a reminder that the housing challenge isn't one problem with one solution. It's likely to require everything from planning reforms and increased private sector supply through to targeted projects like this aimed at supporting people who might otherwise struggle to find secure housing. And speaking of practical initiatives designed to improve quality of life as Southeast Queensland grows, councils are also taking another crack at an area where Queensland has historically lagged behind much of the country: food waste recycling. Food Organics and Garden Organics, better known as FOGO, is returning to the agenda. Brisbane, the Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast and Noosa councils will take part in new trials aimed specifically at apartments, retirement villages and other multi-dwelling communities. Unlike previous efforts focused largely on standalone homes, these trials are testing how food waste collection could work in environments where shared facilities and limited space create additional challenges. The state government has contributed $4 million towards the program, which aims to divert around 530 tonnes of waste away from landfill. Queensland has often been seen as playing catch-up when it comes to food waste recycling, particularly compared with states like New South Wales and South Australia, where FOGO systems are already widespread. So whether this latest attempt finally gains traction will be something worth keeping an eye on. And while researchers are experimenting with new approaches to managing waste, others have been asking whether small changes could reshape the way we move around our cities. A University of Queensland study has found that something as simple as dedicated parking bays for e-scooters and e-bikes could encourage more people to use public transport. The 8-month trial centered around Albion train station and explored whether micromobility could help solve what's often called the first and last mile problem, the challenge of getting to and from stations without relying on a car. Researchers found the introduction of clearly marked parking areas led to a noticeable increase in e-scooter use, while discounted fares had only a modest impact. Interestingly, the biggest barrier wasn't cost. Surveys suggested many people simply couldn't picture themselves using e-scooters at all. Car users were the least likely to consider making the switch, while existing public transport users were more open to the idea. The study comes just 1 week after Queensland passed new e-mobility laws, introducing measures including minimum rider ages and new safety requirements. Whether e-scooters become a genuine transport option for more residents remains to be seen, but the research suggests infrastructure and perception may matter as much as price. And finally, one of the more intriguing ideas to emerge this week wasn't really about housing, waste, or transport, but about time. Brisbane Festival, which this year will feature an ambitious new interactive fountain experience inviting audiences into the city from as early as 6 a.m, has also highlighted another emerging trend, the rise of Brisbane's morning economy. The concept challenges the assumption that vibrant cities only come alive after dark. Instead, it asks whether there are opportunities to activate public spaces through breakfast events, early performances, and experiences designed around the rhythms of everyday life. It's an idea that's gaining attention internationally, particularly as cities look for ways to improve social connection, support local businesses, and create experiences that appeal to a wider range of residents. And perhaps it raises an interesting question for Brisbane. As the city grows and evolves, what aspects of its identity do we want to embrace? Because while discussions about Brisbane's future often focus on skyscrapers, stadia, and major events, culture is shaped just as much by the smaller choices about how we spend our time and interact with the places around us. Before we move on, I've also got something a little different for you. A local Brisbane production company has put together a new mockumentary series called The Cost of Living, which follows a university graduate who ends up working for a morally questionable Brisbane real estate agency called Sunnison & Sons. The 5-episode series will be released for free on YouTube later this month, but before that, there's going to be a special screening event here in Brisbane. The producers have very kindly offered a double pass for viewers of the Brisbane Channel, so if you'd like to go along, let me know in the comments below and I'll draw the winners during the week. If you'd rather guarantee your spot, general admission tickets are available now through the link in the description. Always great to support local creators telling local stories.
And it's not exactly my dream job, but it's not like it's forever. Right?
And if you can't make it to the screening, the series itself will be released on YouTube on the 23rd, 25th, and 27th of June. A quick mention for channel sponsor Excel Psychology. If you need support with things like anxiety, depression, managing ADHD, or relationship challenges, you should consider contacting Excel. They're a warm and inclusive psychology practice based in Spring Hill, just a short walk from Central Station. They've got a diverse team of clinical and registered psychologists, and they focus on matching you with the right person for your needs, often with relatively short wait times. They also offer Medicare rebates with the mental health treatment plan and support work cover and NDIS participants. If you'd like to find out more, you can scan the QR code on screen or check out the link in the description. Now let's move on to the My 2 Cents segment. One thing I've been thinking about this week is what Brisbane actually wants to be. We've spoken a lot over the years about Brisbane's nighttime economy. The frustrations are real. Trying to get dinner after 8 p.m. can sometimes feel like a race against the clock. Finding a decent espresso after 4 in the afternoon? Good luck. There are certainly ways Brisbane could offer people more options later into the evening, and importantly make people feel safe enough to actually use them. And I absolutely think we should continue improving in that space. But at the same time, I know there are plenty of Brisbane residents who are growing tired of hearing that every conversation around the city's future needs to be viewed through the lens of the Olympics. After all, the games themselves only last a few weeks. Most of us still have to live here before 2032 and long after the closing ceremony is over. So I think that ultimately the goal shouldn't be to build a city that works for visitors at the expense of the people who already call Brisbane home. Nor should we ignore opportunities to improve the city simply because they happen to coincide with the Olympics. I think the real question is, what sort of city do we want Brisbane to be? Not just during the games, not just for tourists, but for the people who wake up here every morning, raise families here, commute here, and build their lives here. Because while other cities celebrate their nightlife, Brisbane has done things differently. We're a city of early risers, river walks full of joggers before sunrise, packed suburban cafes by 7 in the morning, weekend markets, outdoor exercise classes, morning swims at Streets Beach, and now even Brisbane Festival is experimenting with major cultural experiences beginning at 6 a.m. For a long time, I think we've almost been embarrassed by some of those differences, as though being a city where people get up early somehow makes us less sophisticated, as though the goal should simply be to replicate Melbourne, Sydney, London, New York. But perhaps Brisbane is becoming confident enough to celebrate the things that already make it distinctive. That's something commentators have started talking about recently, leaning into Brisbane's own identity rather than trying to imitate somewhere else. And I think there's something in that. I don't think Brisbane should remain exactly as it is. Cities evolve, they have to. I want more late night options. I want more activation after dark. I want people to feel comfortable staying in the city later into the evening. But I don't think improving Brisbane means denying who we are. Maybe the answer isn't choosing between a stronger nighttime economy and celebrating Brisbane's morning culture. Maybe it's recognizing that a mature city can embrace both. That we can create new experiences after sunset without losing the character that's developed over generations. That we can welcome visitors from around the world without reshaping ourselves entirely around what we think they expect to find. Because cities people remember aren't usually the ones that are just like everywhere else. They're the ones confident enough to be themselves. And if Brisbane can become a city that better serves its own residents while remaining authentically Brisbane, chances are visitors will want to experience that too. That's my 2 cents. What do you think? Let's chat in the comments. And if you value having an independent voice covering what's happening across Greater Brisbane, I just wanted to quickly thank everyone who supports the Brisbane Channel through memberships or buy me a coffee. The reality is that putting these videos and podcasts together involves a lot more than simply reporting the news. It's attending events, building relationships across the region, digging through planning documents, and trying to bring you a balanced picture of what's happening. On average, around 36 hours of work goes into each of these update videos. If you find value in what I do and you'd like to help keep it going, you can become a channel member using the join button below, or shout me a coffee through the link in the description, or this QR code. There's absolutely no pressure. Watching, commenting, and sharing these videos helps enormously as well. But if you'd like to play a direct role in supporting independent local journalism here in Greater Brisbane, I'd be incredibly grateful. If you missed last week's update video, that's here. Here's the latest podcast that explored our region's public transport, and I'm done.